October 1993, Jingmen, Hubei Province, China. Rainwater drips slowly from the edges of a freshly opened excavation pit. The air underground is cold, damp, and heavy with the smell of ancient soil. A flashlight beam trembles across rotting wooden beams deep inside a warring state's tomb that has not been touched for more than 2,000 years. An archaeologist kneels carefully beside a collapsed lacquer coffin. His brush stops mid-motion. Not gold, not jade, something stranger. Thin bamboo strips, bound together by ancient silk cords long since decayed into dust. For a moment, nobody speaks. Because everyone inside that tomb understands exactly what they are looking at. Words. Lost words. The discovery would later become known as the Guodian Chu slips. Buried around the 4th century BCE in the ancient state of Chu. During China's violent warring states period. The bamboo texts contained philosophical teachings older than many surviving Chinese classics themselves. But at that moment, beneath layers of earth and darkness, the excavators had no idea how deeply these fragile strips would shake the foundations of Chinese history. Each slip was narrow and delicate, blackened by centuries underground. Ink still clung faintly to the surface. Ancient Chinese characters emerged one by one beneath the archaeologists' brushes, like whispers from another civilization. The workers used bamboo tweezers and humidification techniques to prevent the strips from cracking apart. Even breathing too hard near them risked irreversible damage. You have to imagine the tension inside that chamber. A single mistake could erase words that had survived wars, dynastic collapses, floods, fires, and emperors. Dynastic collapses, floods, fires, and emperors. For centuries, historians believed the great philosophical traditions of early China had already been mostly understood. Through surviving texts like the Tao Te Ching, the Analects, and later Han Dynasty compilations, scholars assumed the intellectual map of ancient China was incomplete, but broadly stable. The Guodian discovery changed that almost immediately. Because some passages were familiar, others were not. Certain writings resembled early Taoist teachings but differed significantly from later versions preserved in imperial archives. Entire sequences of philosophy appeared arranged differently. Concepts attributed to later thinkers suddenly appeared centuries earlier. And some texts had never been seen before at all. As researchers slowly reconstructed the slips, laying thousands of fragments across laboratory tables, an unsettling realization began to emerge. History had not merely been forgotten. It may have been edited, an ancient hand carefully altering the record. The tomb itself belonged to the ancient Chu state, a powerful southern kingdom, often portrayed in traditional histories as culturally exotic compared to the northern Zhou heartland. Yet the texts found inside suggested Chu intellectual life was far richer and more sophisticated than official records implied. This mattered enormously. Most surviving ancient Chinese history was compiled during later dynasties, especially the Han Dynasty. Victorious dynasties often determined which philosophy survived, which books were copied, and which versions of events became official. In ancient China, history was never just memory. It was power. Emperors understood that controlling the past meant controlling legitimacy itself. And nowhere was that clearer than under Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of unified China. In 213 BCE, Qin authorities ordered massive book burnings targeting rival philosophies and historical records. Scholars who resisted allegedly faced execution. But the destruction was real enough that countless ancient writings disappeared forever. Or so everyone thought. Then, in the late 20th century, the earth began returning them. The Guodian slips were only the beginning. Years later, the Tsinghua bamboo manuscripts emerged, acquired by Tsinghua University in 2008. Scholars found texts no one expected. Chronicles, political arguments, ancient histories, alternative versions of famous events. Reconstructing the manuscripts became a monumental effort using infrared imaging to reveal faded ink invisible to the naked eye. Ancient China may not have possessed one unified historical tradition before imperial unification. It may have possessed many. And somewhere beneath the soil of China, countless missing voices may still remain buried. London, 1996. Deep beneath the halls of the British Museum, inside a laboratory lit by cold fluorescent lamps, researchers carefully lowered a crystal skull beneath a high-powered microscope. The artifact had sat in museum collections for nearly a century. Millions had seen it, countless theories surrounded it, and now, for the first time, modern science was about to examine every surface in microscopic detail. At first glance, the skull looked ancient. Its quartz surface shimmered beneath the laboratory lights. Tiny imperfections inside the crystal scattered reflections across the steel worktables. To the naked eye, the carving still carried the same eerie beauty that had fascinated collectors since the 19th century. But under magnification, the illusion began to collapse. One researcher leaned closer. Across the polished surface, hidden within the grooves around the teeth and jaw, were faint parallel lines. Not random scratches, not erosion. These marks were precise, repetitive, circular, tool marks, and not the kind produced by ancient Mesoamerican craftsmen. The realization spread slowly through the room. Ancient Aztec and Maya artisans carved hard stone using primitive abrasion techniques. Sand, leather, wooden tools, obsidian blades. Their work left irregular surfaces and microscopic patterns consistent with hand grinding. But the lines visible on the crystal skull resembled something else entirely. Rotary wheel polishing, modern equipment. Suddenly, the timelines surrounding the skulls no longer made sense. Scientists from the Smithsonian and the British Museum began comparing multiple crystal skulls. The results were disturbing. Nearly every famous specimen displayed evidence of modern lapidary technology. Some bore traces of jewelers' wheels introduced during the industrial era. Others contained polishing residue impossible to associate with pre-Columbian civilizations. Even the supposedly ancient where patterns appeared artificially created. The deeper researchers looked, the worse the contradictions became. One of the most famous skulls, the Mitchell Hedges skull, became a central focus. For decades, its legend had remained largely unquestioned. Television programs described it as a 3,000-year-old Maya artifact possessing mysterious powers. Paranormal authors claimed it could induce visions or emit psychic energy. But archival records told another story. Researchers discovered auction documents revealing that Frederick Mitchell Hedges had likely purchased the skull from a London art dealer in 1943. Not excavated it, bought it. The discovery stunned historians. Because if the most famous crystal skull had not emerged from an archaeological site at all, then where had these objects actually come from? The answer seemed to lead back to Europe. During the late 19th century, fascination with ancient Mexico exploded across France, Germany, and Britain. Museums competed aggressively for exotic artifacts. Dealers understood the demand perfectly, and one name appeared repeatedly: Eugene Bobin, the same antiquarian who had first introduced crystal skulls to European audiences decades earlier. Bobin had operated as both collector and dealer during a period when archaeology remained chaotic and poorly regulated. Provenance records were inconsistent. Forgeries circulated constantly through museums and private collections. Quartz itself added to the deception. Unlike softer stone, crystal carried an almost supernatural appearance. To 19th century audiences fascinated by spiritualism and occult science, the skulls felt otherworldly. Europe and America had become obsessed with vanished civilizations. The Maya ruins emerging from jungles across Central America sparked enormous public fascination. Explorers returned with stories of abandoned cities hidden beneath tropical forests. People wanted relics from these worlds, even if those relics had never truly existed. As investigations continued, scientists analyzed the quartz itself. Some samples appeared to originate from Brazil or Madagascar rather than Central America. Combined with the modern tool marks, the evidence became difficult to ignore. The myth was finally collapsing. Paris, late 19th century. Inside workshops hidden behind narrow stone streets, skilled lapidaries bent over rotating polishing wheels. Clouds of mineral dust drifted through the air. Gas lamps flickered against trays filled with quartz fragments. The workers carved gemstones, religious ornaments, decorative figures for Europe's wealthy elite, and possibly human skulls. No official records ever confirmed it. That was part of the problem. The true origin of the crystal skulls remained frustratingly incomplete. Buried somewhere between commercial deception, colonial obsession, and genuine artistic craftsmanship. Scientists could prove many of the skulls were not ancient. But proving exactly who created them and why proved far more difficult. The deeper historians searched, the more fragmented the story became. One theory centered around German gemstone carving centers such as Idar-Oberstein, a town famous for precision quartz craftsmanship during the 19th century. Skilled artisans there possessed the technology capable of producing the microscopic rotary marks later identified on the skulls. Massive amounts of imported Brazilian quartz passed through these workshops every year. Technically, they could have created the skulls. Commercially, they had reason to. European fascination with Mesoamerican civilizations had exploded after explorers returned with accounts of ruined temples. Hidden in jungles across Mexico and Central America. Museums wanted spectacular artifacts. Private collectors wanted objects no one else possessed. Wealthy audiences craved mystery. And few objects were more emotionally powerful than a crystal human skull. It merged science, death, religion, and ancient civilizations into a single image impossible to ignore. But another unsettling question emerged. Did the creators intend the skulls to become archaeological frauds? Or merely exotic art objects later surrounded by mythology? The distinction mattered. Some historians believed dealers like Eugene Bobin may have exaggerated the origins without outright inventing them. In an era where documentation standards barely existed, stories could evolve rapidly. A decorative crystal carving displayed beside authentic Aztec artifacts might gradually become perceived as ancient itself, especially once newspapers became involved. Sensational journalism helped transform the skulls into legends. By the early 20th century, articles described them as ritual objects used by lost priests. Some writers claimed they were linked to sacrificial ceremonies. Others insisted they represented forbidden knowledge erased during the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Evidence remained thin, but emotionally the stories worked. And once the paranormal movement adopted the skulls, the mythology accelerated beyond anything archaeology could control. In dimly lit seance rooms across Europe and North America, spiritualists placed crystal skulls at the center of rituals. Participants claimed they felt vibrations radiating from the quartz. Some reported visions. Others described strange dreams after touching the objects. Scientists dismissed the claims. Yet even some skeptics admitted the skulls possessed an unusual psychological effect. Human beings are hardwired to recognize faces. The skulls exploit that instinct perfectly. You look into the polished eye sockets and your brain searches automatically for consciousness. Combined with the distortions inside transparent quartz, the effect becomes deeply unsettling. The skull appears almost alive. That emotional reaction may explain why rational evidence failed to fully erase belief. Even after the microscopic analyses became public, documentaries continued promoting supernatural theories. Television specials suggested the skulls were repositories of hidden energy. New Age movements claimed 13 ancient crystal skulls existed across the world and would one day reveal humanity's destiny. Then came 2012. As apocalyptic speculation surrounding the Maya calendar spread globally, crystal skull mythology surged again. Internet forums linked the artifacts to planetary alignments and ancient prophecies. Tourists traveled thousands of miles hoping to witness ceremonies involving crystal skulls. Archaeologists watched in frustration, because once again, real Maya history disappeared beneath modern fantasy. The ancient Maya civilization possessed extraordinary achievements: advanced astronomy, monumental architecture, mathematical systems, written language. Washington, D.C. night settles over the silent exhibition halls of the Smithsonian Institution. Long after visitors leave, the museum darkens into shadow. Glass cases reflect faint security lights across polished stone floors. Ancient ceramics from forgotten kingdoms sit motionless behind protective barriers. Gold funerary masks stare outward through centuries of silence. And among them, in carefully controlled light, rests a crystal skull. Its empty eyes still seem awake. Even after decades of scientific analysis, something about it continues to disturb people who stand before it. The quartz catches the light in unnatural ways. Reflections drift beneath the surface like moving water trapped inside stone. You step closer, and the skull appears almost to watch you in return. Science explained the tool marks. It traced the polishing techniques. It dismantled the mythology piece by piece. But the emotional power never completely disappeared. Because the true mystery was never the skull itself. It was humanity. For more than a century, crystal skulls crossed continents. They entered museums, inspired books, fueled paranormal movements. They appeared in films, documentaries, and television specials. Entire generations grew up believing they represented secrets from vanished civilizations. Some still do. And yet, the evidence tells a different story. Not ancient Maya relics. Not Atlantean devices. Not supernatural machines. Instead, the skulls reveal something uncomfortable. How myth becomes history when desire overtakes evidence. Historians began reconsidering the entire environment where the legends emerged. The late 19th century had been an age of imperial expansion and aggressive artifact collecting. European powers removed enormous quantities of cultural objects from colonized regions. Museums competed to display exotic treasures from civilizations many audiences barely understood. In that environment, authenticity sometimes became secondary to spectacle. Collectors wanted dramatic narratives. Dealers supplied them. Newspapers amplified them. And once museums displayed the objects, the authority of the institution itself gave the stories credibility. The crystal skulls slipped perfectly into that system. Not because they were expertly proven, but because they felt emotionally true. Audiences were already fascinated by lost worlds. And the consequences reached beyond archaeology. For indigenous communities, the myths overshadowed authentic cultural achievements. Ancient Maya astronomy, engineering, architecture, mathematics became buried beneath fantasies invented by outsiders. The irony became impossible to ignore. Civilizations that accomplished extraordinary things were transformed into fictional mystical societies. Even among experts, the story produced discomfort. Archaeology was forced to confront difficult questions. How many objects entered museums through weak documentation? How many narratives survived because people wanted them to survive? How often had institutions helped construct myths unintentionally? The crystal skulls became cautionary symbols inside the academic world. Reminders that artifacts without clear provenance reshape public understanding for generations. But outside academia, the legends continued evolving. Some believers insisted the scientific studies were incomplete. Others claimed hidden governments suppressed the truth. Online communities circulated stories about unexplained energies emitted by certain skulls. Modern replicas sold across global markets. New crystal skull ceremonies emerged, blending spiritual traditions with contemporary mysticism.